This week on Talk by Turner, we're diving into mental health, how to support someone close to you struggling with mental illness, what mental health treatment looks like in the United States, recent mental health trends and what they mean, and how to combat stress and control what you can in the face of systemic issues. I'm your host, Jeffrey Colon, and you're listening to Talk by Turner. Talk by Turner dives deep into intellectual discovery while examining what's happening in our world right here, right now. Join us each week to hear from industry experts and published authors as they share their knowledge and insight on today's most important topics. Now, let's see who's on this week's episode. This week on Talk by Turner, we're joined by Miriam Feldman. When her son Nick was diagnosed with schizophrenia in 2004, Miriam became a mental health advocate and a writer. With firsthand knowledge of the state of our mental health system, she decided to be an advocate for those who have no voice. She serves on the advisory board and writes a blog for Bring Change to Mind, Glenn Close's organization, and is active online, where she's building a community of family and loved ones dealing with mental illness. Miriam Feldman, welcome to Talk by Turner.
Thank you so much for having me.
So your son's diagnosis of schizophrenia led you on your journey to learn more about mental health. So can you share a bit about your son's story and what you've learned about mental health, both from him and from your years of mental health advocacy?
Sure. I grew up and lived most of my life without any real awareness or focus on mental illness, and raised 4 kids and spent most of the time raising these kids obsessing about car accidents and cancer and child abductions. And then out of left field comes serious mental illness. And the thing that happened is, if you're to make a list of red flags for serious mental illness and a list of normal teenage behavior, you're going to have basically the same list. They're combative and confused and angry and, off on tangents and don't make sense. And so you have this kid who's just like all the other teenagers, and you think, okay, well, this is normal for teenagerhood. And so there's this period of time, which is what they call the prodromal, which is when it's all beginning, that you don't realize what you're dealing with because there's no way to identify it. And then time went on, and the other kids seemed to be growing out of it, and my son seemed to be getting worse and worse. And finally, with my son, there was a suicide attempt. And that was when we knew something was seriously wrong, and we had to take action and brought him to see a psychiatrist.
A lot of people, so many people have someone in their life that I guess, you could say has struggled with serious mental health issues. This is something that a lot of people go through, yet there's this stigma surrounding mental health, and it can feel, I guess, taboo to talk about it in our culture. So how has your understanding of mental health and mental health treatment, how's that evolved over the years, over your years of doing research and advocacy?
Well, I've become educated, and the mental health system in our country is in appalling shape and needs to be changed in many ways. But the main understanding that I have that's changed how I look at this is you have 2 things. You have mental health. You have the world of mental health, which includes conditions and things like anxiety and depression and all these things. And those are much more treatable and much more understandable. Then on the other end of the spectrum, you have what they call SMI, which is serious mental illness. And SMI is schizophrenia, serious bipolar, the diseases that have a component of psychosis, which is a break from reality. And that's a whole different category and needs to be dealt with separately. We have made tremendous leaps and bounds in the last decade in terms of talking about mental health. You know, there's million-dollar campaigns, commercials, and talk shows, and people talking about opening up and talking about these issues. But those things mostly relate to stigma, which is an important thing to address because it has gotten in the way of people seeking help. But beyond stigma, there's also the issue, again, of serious mental illness, where stigma isn't as much the problem as lack of resources, lack of treatment, and lack of money and hospital beds. And so that's a very serious, different kind of situation that really isn't going to be resolved by overcoming stigma.
Mm. What what do you think is the number one obstacle preventing people from seeking treatment? And to add on to that question, were you delayed in seeking professional help for your son?
Yes, I was delayed because I didn't, like I said, the normal signs of teenager. I didn't recognize it as a problem. And if I could go back in time knowing then what I know now, I would have been able to identify specific behaviors and patterns that were alarming and were indicative. Now, what that creates is a situation where obviously the most important thing that we need is education. We need education for the caregivers, education for medical providers, and education in schools, in churches, and of parents to be able to see and recognize these signs of serious mental illness. Now, it may not always turn out to be that. It may turn out to be normal teenage behavior, but my position is I would rather overreact and be happily embarrassed later than sit and wait and let precious time go by when I could have been seeking treatment.
So what advice would you give to someone who might be listening or watching this episode? Let's say they're struggling with mental health, a serious mental health issue, but doesn't know how to sort of seek treatment. What advice would you give to them?
Well, I would say anybody who's struggling with any kind of mental health issue, it doesn't have to be a serious one, is number one, talk about it. I would say start with your doctor, talk to your general physician and hopefully get some sort of referral or something like that and rule out something that is physical. And, there's so much now in terms of availability of therapy and counselors and people to talk to. You can do it online. You can do it over the telephone. That was one of the really wonderful byproducts of the whole COVID thing was finally people are accepting and embracing the idea of doing these things virtually. Because in small towns and cities all over this country, there are not facilities, there aren't doctors. In the town where I live in Washington State, there is not a psychiatrist on staff at the mental health center seeing people. You have to do it by Zoom. And so now there's more acceptance of that. So my advice would be is seek help, just seek help. We need to get over this idea that there's something embarrassing or wrong or it's showing weakness and just reach out for help. There's so much out there now. Even cost isn't as much of an issue as it used to be.
Which actually leads to my next question, because you brought up cost not being an issue. Are there still some shortcomings specifically within the American health system, or I should say the health insurance system, that affects people getting mental health, treatment and resources?
Oh, yeah, we could talk for hours about that. Yes, it's a disaster. I mean, it really is a disaster. Some insurance plans allow you 6 visits a year and they cover that, and then no more than that, which is a drop in the bucket, not something that's really going to be helpful. And there's a huge shortage of hospital beds, mental health hospital beds in our country now. One of the things that happened also with COVID was a lot of the beds that were designated for serious mental illness were then shifted over to be used for people with COVID and kind of never went back to being available for mental health. So that's a big shortage right there. There's just not facilities for people who need inpatient care.
Speaking of COVID, we're 5 years removed from the start of the pandemic. What lingering effects of the pandemic are you still observing when it comes to mental health, whether it be positive or negative?
Well, again, I would say the positive results of that are the availability and acceptance of virtual therapy. And also, I think it was such a terrible time, and everybody was going through mental health issues then. It wasn't something that was a specific group of people. And so I think as a result of that, there is a bigger acceptance and understanding of how debilitating these mental health issues can be and how resolvable a lot of them are if you seek help.
Yeah. And when we think, I always have to ask a technology question just because it always impacts sort of evolution of change in society and culture. We're speaking on video 1-to-1 right now as we record this. Are things like this, you mentioned telehealth and the ability to Zoom, are those good impacts for mental health? And is there, I guess my add-on to that question, are there privacy concerns as a result of maybe not seeing a medical professional in person?
The issue of privacy, I think, has become just such an overall issue for all of us. I mean, I wouldn't worry so much about what I was saying to my psychiatrist or psychologist on a Zoom call, while at the same time I'm posting, millions of pictures and stories on my Instagram all about my life, and everything's being tracked and fed into the algorithm, and you read stories. I mean, it's just not something that in my opinion is needs to be separated out as a concern. Probably when you're talking on a Zoom call to your therapist, you have more privacy than you would in any other interaction over the internet. And I don't think that should be a big concern of people, because I think the access to seeing somebody is what's more important. Now, on the other hand, I do think that the internet and social media and all of that has been very detrimental, especially to kids, in terms of their mental health. And I mean, there's a million reasons why. We read articles about that every day.
Yeah, I mean, let's go a little deeper on that one in terms of social media and mental health, because it's a large topic. I mean, you can't go a day, as you noted, without reading an article about it or seeing it on the news. What is the impact of social media on mental health? Do you think there are ways that, people use it that's beneficial? Should there be some regulation? As coming from the lens of mental health, what are just sort of your observations or, your opinion on this particular topic?
Well, in terms of regulation, I think it's a runaway train. There's really nothing that can be done about it now that's going to make a difference. And I think also Honestly, if you were to ask me, I think that the negative effects of the internet far outweigh the positive. I just assume the whole thing went away personally. And I think in a mental health world, that would hold true. Again, it's not something that we can do. So kids are on the internet and they're dealing with peer pressure and they're dealing with bullying and they're dealing with all the things that kids have always dealt with, but on this massive scale.
Yeah.
Where when you were a kid, or certainly when I was a kid, if there was a bully or there was somebody giving you a hard time, it was one kid or a few kids in your class. Now it's the whole world is on your phone giving you input. And there's just no way that that's good, because there's no discernment and there's no understanding of where these people are coming from and where this information is coming from. And again, tons and tons of misinformation. I think kids don't really learn how to react and read people's body language and their faces and just what you get from one-on-one interaction with people in real life. So all of that, then you extrapolate it out to these kids growing up to be adults and not knowing how to cope and deal. I think it's just creating more and more problems.
What would be your balance suggestion there when it comes to in life and online? Would you, what would your suggestion be there, I guess, to someone if, like, I just was talking to you like I am right now and said, hey, I spend way too much time online. What do you think I should, how should I balance that out, Miriam? What should I do?
Stop. Read a book. Take a walk. Go visit a friend. Make something. Cook something. Just get back into the real world. And I think that for people with mental health issues, that's good advice. I mean, there's no way that that's not good advice. Now, when you're talking about people with serious mental illness, it's another story. Those people need to be treated and managed and helped in a very different way.
Younger generations, they've been credited with being more open about discussing mental health, especially when we see it in the workplace. What factors do you believe have contributed to this shift in more discussion about mental health by young people, which has now then sort of spilled over into other generations as well, now talking more openly about it? Do you think this, I guess, do you foresee sort of a destigmatization of mental health in American society?
Yeah, again, I do see this happening. I mean, in a very measurable way over the last 10, 15 years. When Nick first got sick, it was 20 years ago. And nobody was talking about it. And nobody was talking about schizophrenia. I mean, schizophrenia is kind of the bastard child of the mental health world. Even within the mental health world, people don't want to talk about it because it's so unknowable. And it's also homogeneous to each lucky recipient. And I say that, of course, sarcastically, where, every single person has to be dealt with differently. So it's terribly frightening and terribly unknowable. And I had nobody to talk to about this because nobody was talking about it. And that is why eventually I wrote my book, because I remember sitting in my living room in my, nice house in the middle of LA in a nice neighborhood and looking out the window and feeling like I was on a desert island and that I was the only person going through this thing, and all the other people had these normal, good lives, and I was somehow tainted and dirty, and, there was this ugliness behind my front door. Well, I've since changed my attitude about that. It's not dirty and tainted and ugly. It just is a disease, and it is what it is, and it needs to be dealt with. But beyond that, I've learned it's behind everyone's front door. Now that I talk about it, there is not a person that I meet that doesn't, have an uncle or a cousin or right in their family. I do book clubs virtually. I go in on Zoom do book clubs who have read my book. And I recently did a book club where it was a dozen women who had been in this book club for years and years and years. And out of the dozen women, it came out during this book club that more than half of them had somebody in their immediate family with serious mental illness, and they didn't know it about each other. And they'd been coming to this book club for 8, 9, 10 years. That's how much people don't talk about it.
What was that like when they opened up about it? I'm just curious, almost wanting to be
amazing.
like a fly on the wall. Did it feel liberating?
Amazing. They were, I mean, the relief on these people's faces, the letting down of this facade, it was really kind of beautiful. And you see, that's the thing, is we need to integrate this into our culture so that it's not this thing that exists over there. And basically, let's just push them all into this metaphorical leper colony and not deal with it. We're all dealing with it. And if we can just be open, then we can help each other, and we can share information, and we can support each other, and we can share resources. And, you know, when I was sitting in my living room looking on the street feeling like I was so alone, and I thought, if I live through this, I'm going to write a book, and I'm going to write the book that is the book I wish I had to read right now. And I actually did. And, you know, my book's been out for 5 years, and I get letters, if not every day, certainly every week, multiple letters saying, oh my God, finally, somebody who gets it, somebody who sounds like me, somebody who sounds like my story. Because this is what people need. They need to know that they're not isolated.
Yeah. And vulnerability, it sounds like, being able to just be open about, this is the situation that I'm in, correct?
And most of the time, you get support, you get love, you get goodness. You know, I mean, it's been rough. I won't kid you. This whole thing has brought me to my knees, but I have been the recipient of such beautiful support and understanding from unexpected places. You know, once there were a lot of years where Nick was just kind of roaming free in LA, and we just couldn't get him treatment, and we didn't know what was happening. And I brought him to Pollo Loco one time because he liked to go there to eat. And it was his neighborhood one where he went all the time. And he went in, we ordered the food, and he went off to pile his plate with the endless salsas. And the woman behind the counter said to me, "He's your son?" And I said, "Yes." And she said, "Oh, I'm so happy to know he has a mother." And I go, "Oh, does he come in here a lot?" And right away what came to my mind was, oh my God, is he making a scene? Is he embarrassing? What do you know? Is it something I have to apologize for? And she said, yes, he comes in here all the time. And she just looked me in the eye, and she took my hand, and she said, we look out after him. And I walked out of there just feeling like, here's this stranger, and could identify something was wrong. And there's a lot of that out there if we can all just open up and let ourselves be a little more vulnerable.
Yeah. What's one thing, Miriam, you'd love, listeners to take away from our discussion today?
Well, again, it stems from stigma. And I have a love-hate relationship with the stigma campaigns. Because on the one hand, those of us who are in the world of SMI sit there and look at these millions of dollars and think, great, that's nice, you're doing these campaigns to erase stigma, but there's not a hospital bed for my kid. There's no new medications for schizophrenia. There's no research being done, or not enough. You know, let's take some of that money and move it over here. But at the same time, it really has opened up people's minds and opened up people's eyes to what's going on, and created a pathway to more understanding and more sharing of information.
Where can listeners, viewers find you online?
Well, I'm all over the place now. We started a podcast called Schizophrenia, 3 Moms in the Trenches. And we did this during COVID, and it's me and 2 other moms. One is a woman who was in the House of Representatives in Minnesota for decades, and the other is an actor and radio personality in Connecticut. And the 3 of us each have adult sons with schizophrenia. And so we made this podcast, Schizophrenia, Three Moms in the Trenches, and it's on all the formats. You can find it anywhere. And we have well over 120 episodes now. We've been doing it for 3 years, and we've had all the luminaries in the mental health world, in the political mental health world. And each episode, we tackle a particular subject. And so it's just a wealth of information and direction, and it's out there for anybody to listen to. So there's that. And I'm also very findable on Instagram, or you can just email me. All my information is out there. My Instagram is Mimi the Riveter. And so far, I managed to answer every single person who's reached out. And the Three Moms do that too, because we are trying so hard to address this in a grassroots way with, for us, the mothers, because the mothers end up being the last resort and the ones who are ending up, the buck gets passed to them and we have no one to pass it to. And we've also created an organization called the Angry Moms, which is also very findable, which is moms of kids with these diseases fighting to change legislation and laws and things like that, which will create a better environment for seeking and getting help.
Nice. So listeners, make sure to check out Miriam's podcast.
And then, of course, there's also my book. It's called He Came In With It, and it's brought to you by Turner Publishing. And it came out about 5 years ago, and it's a memoir. Don't be afraid of it. It's not depressing and a walk through the dark world, though it is that. But at the same time, my way of dealing with the world is through humor. And we found that gallows humor was our way through it. I've gotten letters from people saying, I was sitting in the living room reading your book, and I just kept laughing. And my husband said, I thought you were reading a book about schizophrenia. And she said, yeah, but I can't help it. She makes it so funny. So don't be afraid. You're not going into some dark hole, and there's a lot of information, and people dealing with it, you'll find something you can relate to and not feel so alone.
So listeners, make sure to check out Miriam's podcast and her book. Miriam Feldman, thanks for joining us on this episode of Talk by Turner.
Talk by Turner, hosted by Jeffrey Cologne. Watch and listen now wherever you enjoy podcasts.